Last month, PewDiePie shared Odysseus, an open source platform that allows anyone to run their own private AI. No subscriptions and no sharing of your private data with evil corporations. I have seen this happening many times when someone that is not really in a technical field or has no background in software engineering decides to build a platform from scratch using AI. I always imagine projects with horrible code base, plenty of vulnerabilities, and a project that eventually is going to be taken over by some community to clean up the mess. And what better project to put my theory to test than this one? And I hate to say this, but I was right. Actually, I don't really hate to say this. Now, the project was launched at the end of May, and based on the pattern of code changes, it's pretty clear to me that PewDiePie was just vibe coding the hell out of this project. This repository is full of comedy gold. I've seen updates where around 80 files full of code were just dumped on the code base. I've seen old files that were then modified that at the time had over 4,000 lines of code. That is a lot. And even GitHub threads where the developers were talking to each other, and it was pretty clear to me that they were using AI not only to generate the code, but also to respond. But the thing that really unsettled me and made me fall off my chair, and this is a pretty tall chair, was the fact that while every contributor in this community was actually going through the normal process, requesting feedback before merging changes, PewDiePie was straight up merging large amounts of code into the main code base. But folks, this is not the Martha Stewart show, so I don't want to keep talking about aesthetics. I want to talk instead about vulnerabilities. Obviously, the day after the release of the software, a bunch of vulnerabilities were found, and they are still being found over time. One vulnerability that really stuck with me was a vulnerability present on the API that accepted two parameters, an IP or a host name, and a port. Odysseus would then connect through SSH to that host and run some command to check whether some packages were installed. The port was vulnerable to remote command execution, which means that someone would be able to inject a command and run it on the server. The vulnerability was fixed, but the API still does the same thing. It allows you to pass an IP or a host name and a port, and then Odysseus is going to attempt to connect through SSH and run a command. Now, folks, I've been in cybersecurity for 10 years, and I don't see a world where this is a good idea. RCs are bad, but with AI and LLMs, there is a much more concerning vulnerability called prompt injection. And the prompt injection essentially allows an attacker to manipulate an LLM to do whatever the LLM is capable of doing. For instance, reading your emails, downloading, uploading files. This is essentially RCE on steroids. But you ask, how does Odysseus handle prompt injection? Well, I'm glad you asked. The answer is not very well. The first line of defense is quite expected. They essentially surround data that they don't trust between some specific markers, and then they instruct the LLM to not trust that data or accept any commands presenting that data. And this data can be something like a downloaded file or a read email or a message read from your WhatsApp, depending on the type of integration that you have. Another interesting feature that I've seen in this project is something called an escalation teacher. And an escalation teacher is essentially an LLM that is going to review the results of another student LLM. And in case of failure, it creates a new skill so that that student LLM doesn't make a mistake in the future. Now, I've worked with AI for a while now, and this is essentially useless because even expensive models sometimes ignore your instructions or are vulnerable to prompt injection. But think with me for a second. Expensive LLMs need expensive hardware to run locally. And some people that decide to self-host, they are trying to save a penny. Do you think that they are going to spend thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars in expensive hardware to run smart local LLMs? Of course not. And that is the problem. Relying on local cheap LLMs to police each other is equivalent to rewatching Dumb and Dumber. And on top of this, some people actually self-host for privacy reasons. They don't want to share their information with corporations like Anthropic or OpenAI. The problem is that these open source solutions are sometimes quite vulnerable, and they are developed by people that have no experience in software development or security. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I would rather have some outman know about my private life than some threat group that has bad intentions. Just a thought. Now, I am by no means discrediting PewDiePie. I used to watch him like 10 years ago when he started on YouTube. I know that he has good intentions with this project. However, this is the perfect depiction of software development in 2026. Someone with non-technical skill decides to create a large project that is mostly a bunch of slop written by AI, then they dump that slop on a community that also uses AI to write more slop and review it.